My name is Chris Morrow, and this is Comic-Con at Home. I'm behind the convention center right now, and I'm with the panel Books for All. It's time to redefine how we share books with kids. Hi, guys.
How you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I'm hoping you can introduce yourself and tell me where your home is.
Hi, so I'm Adam Ebert. I am a secondary reading teacher at a school in the south suburbs of Chicago. So that is where I hang my hat.
I'm Adan Alvarado. I'm a secondary English teacher, and I teach down the hall from Adam, so south side of Chicago as well.
I am Jill Gerber, and I'm a middle school English teacher at Rowland Hall in Salt Lake City.
And I'm Yehudi Mercado, writer, artist, animator, and I live in Burbank, California.
All right. Well, tell me about the panel. What did you guys discuss?
So a big discussion was, we have teachers, we have creators, we have Christina was a former librarian. So really the conversation centered around just, again, looking at that title, how do we share books with kids? How are we creating books for children? So, and how that's constantly changing. I think something Tony Weaver from Weird Enough Productions brought up was that kids, if they don't have a space, will find a space. So it's all about how do we as these kind of gatekeepers create a space for students to, or just kids, to find books and to not only find themselves in what they're reading, but also, people who aren't like them in what they're reading.
And what is that importance? To see someone that isn't like me in a book?
I think that's everything. Like as a creator, I've always created stories and books, because I'm Mexican, born in Mexico, put characters of color in all my books. But it feels like it's only until recently that that's become sort of like desired in the marketplace. I feel like people now are realizing how crucial it is for kids to see themselves represented in fiction and have heroes of color, featured, and not as victims and not as sort of like, poverty porn, if you will. Like it's like heroic figures of color that are funny and witty and are engaging. Like I think that's everything.
Have you ever had an editor tell you to dial it down on the diversity?
No, not a book editor, but one of my books was optioned for by a producer, and the main character was black, and every pitch meeting they would say, "Oh, change that character to white, and we'll make it." And it's like a totally different story. Like it wouldn't be interchangeable. Yeah. So it definitely in Hollywood, but I feel like Hollywood's now finally catching up.
Well, and I think the schools are too. Comics are a nice bridge from picture books. And as picture books have been diversifying, and it's more than just race and ethnicity, it's also, disabilities and LGBTQ plus content. Comics are a natural segue to not only have kids see themselves, but also to generate empathy and understanding. It's a powerful medium because readers have to put themselves into the story that you don't get with prose books.
Yeah.
There's also just there's a validation element to seeing yourself in works of fiction, right? And it's not that you need that validation, but it feels good when you see a company like Disney invest millions of dollars in something like Coco, right? Because it's like, all right, I've never seen myself or seen these companies care enough to depict my life or customs from my culture, or like Grandma Coco, like that's my grandma, right? So like to see her, you're able to connect with that in a different way, and that's always been the case, right? To be able to connect with something personal, just even if that work is not beyond criticism, it still elevates it for you to a certain extent. I remember the first time I was just reading something like The Outsiders, right? Who's written by a white author, but when I was younger and having just read mostly canonical works, to come across that work and see people who were struggling monetarily and just seeing them operate in life in a different way than I was used to seeing in works in school, that was it just helped me connect better to that, because I'm like, oh, I get that. I get like why they're going through that particular struggle at this time. So to actually see yourself physically, it just adds a whole other layer of connection.
Yeah, and I think even on top of empathy as a connecting piece, I think something else it's for when we're finding people who are like us and especially who aren't like us. I think that's you're building knowledge and you're building awareness of people who aren't like you, and that's incredibly important. You know, when you're trying to flesh out your perspective of the world or trying to find perspectives that you don't necessarily see in your everyday life, I think literature, and it's something that we've preached always as English teachers, literature is this gateway to another world. So another world doesn't need to be Narnia. Another world can just be another world that we don't necessarily encounter in everyday lives. So I think that's something major in terms of finding people that we don't necessarily not empathize with, but identify with, right? We need to be able to empathize with people we don't necessarily identify with.
Yeah, in my book, my new book, Fun World, it's kind of my sneaky immigration story. So it's aliens who think they took over the planet, but what they really took over was an amusement park. But it takes like a kid, like an innocent kid, to realize like, oh, these aliens aren't scary.
We talked a little bit also about the importance of being judicious about selecting books, that making sure that representation is accurate, particularly if titles have come from a different culture or basically from Europe and have been translated, to make sure that it's accurate and doesn't perpetuate stereotypes, and own voices, you know, being the preference.
You know, my interpretation of Books for All is finding something that works for everyone, not necessarily one size fits all, but saying, I have a diverse group of learners in my classroom. What's something that's going to work for this group? What's something that's going to work for this group, so that there's not anyone falling to the wayside? You know, especially there being, you know, kids who felt like there was never a book or a character or a story that reflected their experience. The diversity of the titles being created now allows for those opportunities. So I look at, again, not that there's something that's an overall, but something that works for everyone in their own individual way.
Yeah, there's something for everyone. And there's something about making a story that's hyper targeted at a specific demographic that then has universal messages. I feel like that opens the door wider also.
Are there more titles that you guys could tell me about?
So I know a particular title for me that stands out is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, which is an LGBTQ plus story, and that has never stayed on my shelf for very long. Kids love that just because they love this teenage heartbreak story that they find incredibly relatable regardless of their sexual orientation. So I know that that's something that really stands out to me in terms of a book that kids just love. And it's a beautiful book, and I think a story that resonates.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I was going to tout any title, it's right now the book that I'm touting the most is Richie Pope's That Box We Sit On. It's just a short 20-page story, but it's these kids sitting on a box contemplating the purpose of the box. And each purpose that they come up with essentially works as a metaphor for things that young people are dealing with, especially in young communities of color, every day, right? So they get to sort of philosophize or sort of provide these musings on like what's going on in their hood, but they do it through these sort of really like ornate metaphors about what this box could potentially be. And it ranges anything from like this black hole to this robot that protects them from police officers to all these different ideas that they throw out of what this box is. And in just a short period of time, through these fantastic illustrations, I think he tells an important story that can start a lot of conversations.
For me, memoirs have been really popular this year. And I'd like to do a shout out to Black Mage, which was hugely popular for my middle schoolers. And what I liked about it was it had diverse characters, but it wasn't about diversity. It was more about inclusivity and just normal kids experience, well, normal as wizards, but just normal kids that weren't going through any kind of, you know, urban problem. So it shows the power of the medium and the ability to be inclusive without, like what Yehudi talked about, without it just being about pain.
Yeah, and diversity can also be, you know, health issues too. Like Raina Telgemeier's Guts is about a kid with health problems, and I grew up with health problems, so like I could relate to a book like that. So it's not just about skin color; it's also about, like, you know, inherent issues kids grow up with that you don't really see a lot in fiction.
Oh, with some of the memoirs too, that they're really relevant now. Like I'm thinking of George Takei's The Enemy Within,
Yeah.
you know, that are great for kids to start making those connections to what they're seeing on TV, right? And start connecting past to present.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.